and Geno Auriemma called Caitlin Clark not built for the WNBA and labeled her fans delusional. Fast forward 6 months, and basketball's most stubborn coach can't stop praising her. What made him completely flip his opinion on live TV? The story behind his dramatic change of heart reveals something bigger than basketball, and it's not what anyone expected. Let's rewind to when Geno Auriemma first shared his thoughts about Caitlin Clark. Speaking on The Dan Patrick Show, he didn't mince words. He called her fan base delusional and claimed they were setting her up for failure. Strong words from a coaching legend, right? So Geno Auriemma talked about Caitlin Clark again. This ought to be fun. Anyhow, he was a guest on a podcast, Make a Difference with Phil Martelli, who obviously Phil Martelli also a coach, longtime coach in college basketball. His main argument, Clark wasn't physically ready for the WNBA. He thought she'd struggle with the league's aggressive defenders and intense physicality. Remember, this is coming from someone who's coached some of the greatest players in women's basketball history at UConn. When Auriemma speaks, people listen. And this time, his words sent shockwaves through the basketball community. If you're a college player and you're a great college player like Caitlin was, Auriemma said, the delusional fan base that follows her disrespected the WNBA players by saying she's going to go in that league and tear it apart. He didn't stop there. He pointed out how betting odds had Clark listed 3rd or 4th for MVP before she even played a single WNBA game. In his view, this was a slap in the face to every WNBA player. But here's what makes this story fascinating. Clark didn't just enter the WNBA, she stormed in. Leading the Indiana Fever, she averaged 19.2 points, 8.4 assists, and over 5 rebounds per game. Those aren't just rookie numbers, those are star player numbers. The same player Auriemma claimed wasn't ready was now making veteran defenders look like they were the ones who needed to adjust. Like, people think it's a rocket ship, and really it's been an ascension. Just because you all been around doesn't mean everybody else has been around. And I credit Geno for saying that. He said they weren't paying attention. Now, that doesn't mean there wasn't incremental growth. I've said that a billion times. There's incremental growth, but to act like the explosive growth didn't just happen is naive. It's naive. And then to, say that about Caitlin and then have to go out of your way to say something else and insert Paige into the conversation is something too. The thing about Clark's game that really turned heads wasn't just her scoring. Everyone knew she could shoot. That was never in question. It was her ability to control the game's pace, to see plays before they happened, and to make her teammates better. She was doing things that even seasoned WNBA players found impressive. Remember when Diana Taurasi, another UConn legend, sided with Auriemma? She said Clark was in for a rude awakening. Well, if there was any awakening, it was for everyone who doubted her. Clark didn't just adapt to the WNBA's physical play, she thrived in it. She learned to use her quickness to create space, her basketball IQ to outsmart defenders, and her passing ability to punish teams that focused too much on stopping her shot. What's really interesting is how Clark handled all the criticism. She never fired back at Auriemma or anyone else who doubted her. Instead, she let her game do the talking. During one particularly memorable game against the New York Liberty, Clark dropped 35 points and 12 assists. After the game, she simply said, "I'm just trying to play my game and help my team win." That kind of composure under pressure, that's what separates good players from great ones. The transformation in how people talked about Clark was fascinating to watch. Early in the season, commentators would point out every mistake, every defensive lapse, almost like they were waiting for Auriemma's predictions to come true. But as the games went by, the narrative started to shift. The same analysts who questioned her readiness were now breaking down her highlights, analyzing how she was changing the game. Social media played a huge role in all of this. Every time Clark made a deep three or threw a no-look pass, the clips would go viral. The WNBA's social media engagement numbers shot through the roof. Game attendance spiked, especially for Fever games. Television ratings followed suit. Clark wasn't just proving her critics wrong, she was helping to grow the entire league. But perhaps the most telling sign of Clark's impact came from her fellow players. Veterans who had initially been skeptical started praising her approach to the game. They saw how hard she worked in practice, how she stayed late to work on her shot, how she studied film. She wasn't asking for special treatment, or acting like she was above the grind of professional basketball. The Indiana Fever's coaching staff deserves some credit here too. They built their offense around Clark's strengths, but didn't shy away from challenging her to improve her weaknesses. They worked with her on defensive positioning, on dealing with physical play, on all the things Auriemma had said would be her downfall, and Clark responded to every challenge. As the season progressed, something unexpected started happening. The very things Auriemma had criticized became Clark's strengths. He said she couldn't handle physical play. She learned to use it to her advantage, drawing fouls and getting to the free throw line. He said she wouldn't be able to get her shot off against WNBA defenders. She adjusted her release point and actually improved her shooting percentage. The stats tell part of the story. Those 62 broken records speak volumes, but the eye test tells an even more compelling tale. Clark wasn't just surviving in the WNBA, she was changing how teams had to play defense. Her range meant defenders had to pick her up practically at half court. Her passing meant you couldn't double-team her without paying a price. She was forcing coaches to rewrite their playbooks. One particular game stands out. It was against the defending champion Las Vegas Aces. Before the game, Aces coach Becky Hammon was asked about Clark. Her response: "We're not playing against a rookie tonight. We're playing against a basketball player who happens to be in her first year." That's the kind of respect Clark had earned. The media narrative started shifting too. Gone were the questions about whether she could handle the league. Now reporters were asking if she was changing the game itself. Her style of play, the long-range shooting, the flashy passes, the constant motion, it wasn't just effective, it was entertaining. She was bringing new fans to the sport, people who had never watched a WNBA game before. Looking back, it's almost funny how wrong the skeptics were. They said she was too slight to handle the physical play. She ended up being one of the most durable players in the league. They said her fancy passes wouldn't work against WNBA defenders. She finished among the league leaders in assists. They said she'd struggle to score. She became one of the most efficient scorers in the league. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn. As Clark's success became undeniable, Auriemma's tone started to change. The shift was subtle at first. Less criticism, more measured analysis. But something bigger was brewing, something that would lead to one of the most surprising turnarounds in basketball commentary. The basketball world started noticing a pattern. Whenever Clark's name came up in interviews, Auriemma would pause before answering. Gone was the quick dismissal, replaced by something that looked almost like admiration. People who knew him well could see it. He was wrestling with something. The question was, what had caused this change? This transformation wasn't happening in a vacuum. The entire landscape of women's basketball was shifting. TV ratings were up. Social media engagement was through the roof. And at the center of it all was the player Auriemma had doubted. The numbers couldn't be ignored. Clark wasn't just playing well, she was helping to grow the game. Behind the scenes, something else was happening. Other coaches were reaching out to Auriemma, sharing their observations about Clark's game. Fellow UConn alumni in the WNBA were telling him about what they saw on the court. The evidence was mounting. Clark wasn't just good, she was special. As the season progressed, the storylines around Clark evolved. It wasn't just about proving doubters wrong anymore. It was about watching a player help revolutionize the game. Her style of play was influencing younger players. Kids in gyms across the country were trying to replicate her moves, her shooting form, her vision. The real turning point in Auriemma's perspective came during a nationally televised game. Fox College Hoops had prepared a special tribute video for Clark, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect. The video wasn't just about her stats or highlights, it was about her impact on the game, told through the voices of those who had watched her journey. What made this moment special wasn't just the tribute itself, but who was in attendance. Auriemma was there, And for once, he wasn't just a critic. He was a witness to something bigger than basketball. The video showed clips of packed arenas, young fans holding "Be Like Caitlin" signs, and veteran players praising her impact on the sport. During this special broadcast, something unexpected happened. When asked about Clark, Auriemma's response was nothing like his previous criticisms. "She's an incredible phenomenon that very rarely happens," he said, his tone completely different from his earlier skepticism. "She's certainly changed the landscape, no question about it. But here's where things get really interesting." Around the same time as Auriemma's change of heart, news broke about his involvement with Unrivaled, an up-and-coming 3-on-3 basketball league. The timing raised eyebrows. Was his newfound appreciation genuine, or was there something more strategic at play? The league had been aggressively pursuing Clark, seeing her as the perfect face for their new venture. With Auriemma having a financial stake in Unrivaled, some questioned whether his praise was sincere or simply good business. After all, having Clark associated with the league, even indirectly, could be worth millions in publicity. Industry insiders started connecting the dots. Clark had already turned down offers from Unrivaled, despite several of her former teammates, including Aaliyah Boston and Kate Martin, signing on. But even without her direct involvement, Clark's public support could be invaluable for the league's credibility. The basketball community was divided. Some saw Auriemma's change of heart as a genuine admission that he'd misjudged Clark. Others viewed it as a calculated move to court her favor for his business interests. The truth, as often happens, probably lay somewhere in between. What couldn't be denied was Clark's impact on the sport. Television ratings for women's basketball had skyrocketed. Her jersey became the WNBA's top seller before she even played her first professional game. She wasn't just a player anymore, she was a phenomenon, bringing new fans to the sport in droves. The media coverage reflected this transformation. Sports networks that had once given minimal attention to women's basketball were now leading with Clark highlights. Her games became must-watch events, with casual fans tuning in just to see what she might do next. Even more telling was the impact on youth basketball. Coaches reported seeing more young girls at tryouts, many wearing Clark's number. Her style of play, the long-range shooting, the creative passing, the fearless approach, was inspiring a new generation of players. The tribute video that aired that night captured all of this. It featured touching words from basketball stars like Paige Bueckers and Angel Reese, as well as her former coaches and teammates. Each spoke not just about her skills, but about how she'd changed the game's culture. Lisa Bluter, her college coach at Iowa, spoke about Clark's work ethic and leadership. "She's not just talented," Bluter said. "She's a student of the game. She's always the first one in the gym and the last one to leave." These weren't just empty praise. They were insights into why Clark had succeeded where others had doubted. The video also highlighted something else: Clark's humility amid all the attention. Despite breaking records and proving critics wrong, she remained focused on team success. Her post-game interviews consistently deflected personal praise to acknowledge her teammates and coaches. As the tribute played, cameras caught Auriemma's reaction. The usually stoic coach appeared moved, particularly during segments showing Clark's impact on young fans. It was a visible representation of how her story had transcended the usual sports narratives. But perhaps the most powerful part of the video was its focus on Clark's resilience. It showed clips of commentators doubting her, including Auriemma's own critical comments, followed by highlights of her proving them wrong. The contrast was striking and undeniable. The basketball world took notice of Auriemma's change in perspective. Social media exploded with reactions, many pointing out the irony of one of her biggest critics becoming an admirer. Memes and video edits comparing his before and after comments went viral. What made this story resonate wasn't just about basketball. It was about challenging preconceptions and breaking barriers. Clark had entered the WNBA facing doubts about her physical readiness, her style of play, and her ability to adapt. She'd responded by changing how people viewed the game itself. The ripple effects went beyond sports. Clark's success challenged broader narratives about women's athletics. Her games drew comparable viewership to men's contests, and her marketing appeal transcended traditional sports demographics. She was proving that women's basketball could be both commercially successful and incredibly entertaining. Industry analysts started studying what they called the Clark effect. Arena attendance spiked not just for her games, but for women's basketball in general. Television networks began bidding more aggressively for women's basketball rights. The economic impact was undeniable. The story also highlighted changing dynamics in sports media. Traditional gatekeepers like Auriemma found their opinions challenged by new metrics of success: social media engagement, streaming numbers, merchandise sales. Clark wasn't just winning on the court. She was winning in the new digital economy of sports. As the season continued, something else became clear. Clark wasn't just living up to the hype, she was exceeding it. Her play style, which some had dismissed as too flashy for the pros, was actually expanding what was possible in women's basketball. She was hitting shots from ranges that made traditionalists uncomfortable, making passes that defied conventional wisdom. Looking ahead to the 2025 season, expectations are higher than ever. Analysts predict Clark will continue to evolve her game, adding new dimensions to her already impressive skill set. The Fever, once an afterthought in the WNBA, are now seen as contenders, largely thanks to her presence. But perhaps the most lasting impact of this story isn't about statistics or wins, it's about perception. Clark proved that women's basketball could be both technically excellent and incredibly entertaining. She showed that success could come without conforming to traditional expectations. And what about Auriemma? His journey from critic to admirer mirrors a broader shift in how the sport is viewed. Whether his change of heart was influenced by business interests or genuine appreciation, the fact remains, Clark's success forced even her harshest critics to reevaluate their positions. The story continues to evolve. Each game brings new highlights, new records, new reasons for fans to tune in. But more importantly, it brings new evidence that women's basketball is entering a new era, one where players like Clark can redefine what's possible on the court. Was Auriemma's change of heart genuine, or is there more to the story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories in women's basketball. See you in the next video.